Welcome to the Podcast Discovery Show, the podcast that's about other podcasts, where every single week we have a book club style discussion about a podcast that we recommended last week. And at the end of this episode, we're going to recommend a brand new show, and we'll talk about that one next week. I'm Kirk.
And I am Zach. And this week we're talking about a show that Kirk recommended called Newcomers. And the specific episode is called Return of the King. But what they do in this show is hosts Nicole Byer and Lauren Lapkus go through really nerdy pop culture things that they have completely missed or ignored on purpose and dig in with people who are extremely passionate about it. So in season 1 of this show, they did everything Star Wars. They explored as much of the Star Wars canon as was possible. Season 2, all Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, everything. And they have just started their newest season, which honestly, we're both interested as soon as we heard about it. They are doing the entire Tyler Perry canon. And that is going to be something really special. But yeah, basically they kind of break down a specific element of whatever fandom they're exploring at the time. And so the episode we're doing is literally just about the movie Return of the King, the final Lord of the Rings movie.
Yes, and they go like into even obscure stuff in that franchise. Like I saw they even did an episode about the video game for Lord of the Rings, the Shadows of Mordor. They did an episode on that. They had the voice actor who plays Talion in that game as the guest host in that episode. It's just they go so deep, and it's funny because they're not fans. That's what's great about it is they don't know anything going in, and usually they're not big fans by the time.
They're not necessarily sold by the end. It's not that kind of show where it's like, now they love Lord of the Rings. It didn't really feel that way.
But the way that I found this show is it just popped up on my Spotify, and I saw that Nicole Byer was one of the hosts, and me and my kids have binge watched Nailed It on Netflix, which if you haven't watched that show, you should. It's hilarious.
It is really funny.
Great. So it's a baking show, but they get horrible bakers to come on there and they give them really hard tasks to do. And it's just hilarious what they end up doing. Like like this is what it's supposed to look like, and then this is what it does look like, and it's usually so bad and terrifying.
No, and I'm not like an amazing baker, but I've baked a lot. But being on that show, I would be out of my element too. It's advanced baking for people that can't do basics, is what it is.
They pick the worst bakers ever, and it's great because like there was a lady we were watching one the other day. And the lady forgot to put flour in her cake.
Yeah, she was just baking a pool of eggs, basically.
No, she was just making an omelet. It's a great show.
Nicole Byers does make it.
She's hilarious. She's so funny. But when I saw she had a show and it was about Lord of the Rings, I'm like, yeah. So I listened to a few episodes and I asked Zach, I'm like, what's your favorite Lord of the Rings movie? And we both kind of landed on the last one, which was Return of the King.
And I'll tell you something, a little bit of honesty. I like to consider all three of them one movie, and they're all my favorite.
Okay.
Because, this was a good one. This was a good one for, big time. Like, big time. This is definitely one that, like, I have seen a lot of Lord of the Rings. We will dig into that a little more later.
Yeah. So, like I said, Nicole is one of the hosts, but the other host is Lauren Lapkus, which I saw her face in the title. I'm like, where do I know her from? She's in so many like movies and TV shows, usually as like a supporting role,
really,
or like a small role. But she was in Jurassic World. She was in Orange Is the New Black. She was in Crashing, and she's been in a bunch of different things. And there's some stuff coming up that she's going to be in. But so yeah, she's. Even the voice was like, I recognize her voice. In fact, I think she's a voice in a show that I'm watching on Netflix right now, but I don't want to say it and be wrong. But she does a lot of voiceover stuff too. Yeah, she's in Big City Greens as a voiceover actress. So my kids watch that show all the time. So that's what I'm saying is like I hear these voices, and I'm really good at like recognizing people's voices. Yeah, I was watching. My kids were watching Big City Greens not that long ago, and I heard Griffin McElroy on there, and I'm like, "That's Griffin." And I looked it up, and sure enough, it was. And it
I
was
do
funny.
feel like I could pick all three of their voices out of a lineup for sure.
But the people that they had as the actual fans of the franchise on this episode was Gabriela Paella and Callie Bozeman. And Gabby, as I'm going to say, and that's what they called her as well, she's a culture writer for GQ. She's had stuff written up in New York Magazine, The Cut, Rolling Stone, and The Guardian. So she's an amazing journalist. And Callie Bozeman, as well, is a journalist. She is a journalist that focuses on, and I love this. I can tell that when they introduced them, they read the same thing that I'm reading. She focuses on culture, sex, politics, reproductive justice. And this is the one that just kind of throws me off a little bit, the occult. So, okay, culture, sex, politics, reproductive justice, and the occult. It's just funny.
They always go together so well.
And that's for New York Magazine and The Cut. She's had things in New York Times, Jezebel, Vice. So two great journalists that love Lord of the Rings.
Mhm.
And it's funny because the way that they knew each other was because of their love of Lord of the Rings, both of them. So that's the format of the show, and those are the guest hosts. And so, what did you think about the show, Zach?
I'm all about it. It's definitely one of many things that I've listened to / watched about Lord of the Rings, because it really was like, it's interesting to hear people who kind of have to be convinced, because I remember the first time I watched the first Lord of the Rings in theaters and my mind was blowing up. You know, I sat there after it was done, because they essentially, like, it was written as one movie essentially. And so there was breaks in them and everything like that, but they released them year after year. They recorded, they did the whole thing as one. And so I remember watching like the kind of the first scroll and everything like that. I still remember how it felt. And then since then, I have watched the extended editions, all three of them together, multiple times. Like, I would essentially take, like, if there was times where I would house sit for my brother, then I would just, while I was over there, that would be the thing that I was going to do, is I was just going to watch The Lord of the Rings again. And I've also seen, they have on the special edition, they have a whole behind the scenes featurette for each movie that I've also watched all of. And
I need to watch that. I haven't watched that.
It's so interesting, because just the amount of work they put in to make this movie how it ended up. So I'm a huge fan.
That's what is missing a little bit with not having DVDs anymore.
Yeah, you lose the extras. I don't
You
really
don't
know.
have like the behind the scenes stuff a lot. You don't have the what is it called, where the person's
Director's
talking
commentary?
Yes, the commentary. A lot of them, where are you going to find that anymore? Like, I don't know where to find that kind of stuff anymore.
No, it's and I do miss it, because I was such a big fan of Lord of the Rings, I wanted to know, because it looks amazing. You know, the movie looks great. They do amazing things with it, so I wanted to know more. So it's funny to hear kind of the opposite side of this, where they're watching something, and I also get it, because we both read fantasy, and like there's a billion names that are all like fantasy, and there's a billion different like things happening, and there's always histories involved, and that, like, I get that it's burdensome to get involved in some of these, I do get that. But on top of them kind of like they walk through the whole movie, and
Yeah.
it basically, it reminds me of just kind of people talking, like a group of friends talking about their impressions about the movie, because like Kirk said, two of them watched the movies for the first time, and they even said, like, oh, it took me 4 attempts to do it, because they'd watch a piece and then they'd get bored and they'd wander off and they'd go do a thing, and then they'd watch some more. But then two of them are like us, and we have seen it a lot of times and can answer questions. So there was a lot of questions being answered, and throughout that whole time, it's hilarious, because it's a really funny conversation the whole time.
Yeah, no, and Nicole reading the names in the movie is probably one of my favorite things in the whole episode. Is she butchers them in such the most amazing comical way possible.
Yeah, no, towards the end, she reads like essentially a synopsis of the movie. So, like a 2-paragraph, what is the Return of the King? And she threw out, like, I think Theodore was in there and Jimmy. And yeah.
I think she was supposed to say Gimli, but she just said Jimmy.
Oh, yep. And Theodore's Theoden, I think. So, like, all of them kind of make sense, but she just kind of wings it as she's doing it. And it's really funny. But there was a lot of stuff that they talked about that, because we listened to this together, actually. We were like laughing while it was happening.
Mhm.
And there was a couple pretty interesting things they talked about because the two guest writers, so Gabby and Callie, I think both of them had written pieces about Lord of the Rings. Like, so
Mhm.
they had gotten to that place where they could eventually write about what they were like passionate about. And some of them were interesting. I think Kirk has one of these pulled up, but they also talked about like, they were having a sexual awakening in this show or in this movie. And I mean, I will say that there is very limited female roles in this movie. And
Yeah.
so like it wasn't something that like that wasn't my experience with Lord of the Rings.
No.
It was more just the sheer awe of what they did in this movie.
I mean, I fell in love with Liv Tyler in
Sure.
this movie, but she was in the movie for 10 minutes, and I'm talking about in it like 40 hours worth of movie. She was in there for like 10 minutes. So it's
Yeah.
like, it's almost like it doesn't count. But yeah, and the article they wrote, and it's both of them wrote this article together.
Oh, they wrote it together. Okay.
Yeah. And it is, which Lord of the Rings characters have BDE? If you don't know what BDE is, you can look that up on your own. But it's very funny. It's just a listicle, but it is hilarious. So I'm just gonna do a quick synopsis. Aragon, duh. So does Viggo Mortensen always. Frodo, nope. Sam has TDE for the T stands for tiny, perhaps the least energy of any person, fictional or real. Pippin, yes. Have you heard Pippin's song? Which I do not remember that either.
Oh, I definitely remembered that.
I did not remember that. I love how they're like Gandalf the Grey. Nah. Gandalf the White. Yes.
Okay. I could see that. Makes sense.
Not to me. I liked Gandalf the Grey. You know, at least when he was fighting the Balrog. You know, that's like, you shall not pass. I loved that.
Yeah,
you know?
no, but that was like the transition to white. Before that, he was more like kind of gentle. But
Yeah.
when he came back, it was wild.
Gimli, somehow no, but he has WDE. The W stands for wide. Galadriel, of course she has it. Like all of Cate Blanchett's characters ever in history.
True. She is amazing.
But yeah, it's a funny article, and it's funny that these two ladies loved Lord of the Rings so much that they wrote this article about what character had BDE.
Yeah. No, and that is something that still is pretty amazing to me because there's still people like us and like half of this show that are still really passionate about these movies. Because when did these movies come out? I think it was in high school, right?
I was maybe even late middle school when they first came out, right?
We gotta look this up right now.
Yeah, when you look it up. While you look it up, so I was thinking about my experience with Lord of the Rings. I remember literally seeing a poster for it, and just this like small dude holding a ring, and I'm like, "What is this movie? What is it about? Lord of the Rings?" Because I didn't know anything about the books or anything like that, and I remember seeing that in theaters. Like, I don't know why I vividly remember seeing the poster for the first time, being like, "That looks stupid," and then seeing the actual trailer for it, like on TV, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this looks epic!" And then seeing it in theaters, and I was like, "This is my new favorite thing ever in history." But one of the things where I nerded out more than anything ever in regards to Lord of the Rings is there was a video game that came out. It was a computer game. It was called Battle for Middle Earth 2. And it was an RTS. So it was a real-time strategy game. So it was like StarCraft, but it was all Lord of the Rings. And it was amazing. I wish I could play it again right now. It was so good.
You probably can with Steam, but are you ready to feel old? The Fellowship of the Ring came out in 2001.
Oh my gosh.
Literally 20 years ago.
20 years ago.
So yeah, that's middle
Wow.
school. That is definitely middle school for us. That's not high school. And yeah, okay. Part of the reason why I liked all the extended cuts so much is because they really go into the making of the movie. Because I think that they lived together in New Zealand for it feels like it was 5+ years, where the entire cast was there because they started recording this or like shooting it in general in like 97 or something like that. Or in like 99, they started early and they just kept recording throughout. All of them had a bunch of birthdays together. They all got tattoos. They all got tattoos that are the same. All of the main fellowship. But yeah, they lived together for a really long time to create this movie. And you learn a lot more about that. You learn all these background things about them that's really interesting. I loved it. I loved watching it, but I'm definitely a super nerd on it. But it's just crazy to me that even after 20 years, there's still this kind of following, because I think they just dropped like the 4K remasters for the 20-year thing, and it is extremely impressive that that movie is 20 years old and looks the way it does.
Huh. They mentioned some of like the facts or like, like trivia about the movie, and one of the ones was that the New Zealand Army was used as extras and in battle scenes, and that it was like the battle scenes got too intense and so many people were injured because there were actually army guys against stunt doubles. And it was I thought that was a pretty good one. Did you know that originally Sean Connery was cast as Gandalf, but he never understood he didn't understand the plot or anything, so he didn't take the role.
It would be hard to even imagine that at this point, because
in the fact that I'm reading,
so
it says
good.
If he would have taken the role, his fee would have been 15% of the film's like income, like its budget.
Oh, that's ridiculous. But yeah, this these movies ended up winning a bazillion Oscars for basically all kinds of filmmaking things. So I just always was really captured by how well they produced this movie. And so I really, really enjoyed this podcast because it kind of helped me think back to that. Like the first time you see it and you're trying to understand stuff, because they essentially do ask questions about the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
They try to figure out, okay, so why did this happen? What happened here? And they make fun of it also, but that's fine. That's hilarious. And so it was a really fun way to kind of like explore something that I kind of took for granted that everyone just was fairly familiar with at this point, because it's very popular. But I don't know. It was definitely a fun listen. It was fun to hear people like watch it for the first time.
No,
I do wish I could do that. If I had some ability to like, or read a book, there's some books, or like listen to an album, that first time where you like, it connects with you, it's a special moment. And so it was fun to listen to.
So one of the reasons that Return of the King is my favorite of the three is because I've seen it so few times. So I have like this encapsulated memory of it. I don't think I've seen it more than like 3 or 4 times. Whereas I think I've seen Fellowship of the Ring like 15 times. So it's like I've overseen it. It's like A New Hope. I've seen A New Hope so many times. Like I feel like I hate that movie, but I don't. But it feels like I do because I've seen it so many times. Whereas the culmination of the story with Return of the King is kind of like still etched in my mind as I still remember the first time I saw it because that's almost the last time I saw it. But there was a lot of things I didn't remember when they were talking about in the podcast. They talked about themed birthdays and how Vanessa Hudgens had a themed birthday for Lord of the Rings. And I thought that bit was hilarious when they were talking about that's the surefire way to not have me come to your birthday party. Have a themed birthday. You got to give me homework to come to your birthday party. No thanks. What do you think about themed birthdays?
I mean, I don't really. I've never experienced them too much. I haven't really been invited to a lot of themed birthday parties. We threw one time, but it was really half-assed. Like it wasn't wasn't a hard line theme like that. I do feel like
the Gatsby, Great Gatsby one.
Yeah, no, but basically the extent of the theme was we put on like 30s jazz and we drank French 75s and we wore fancy clothes for the first hour or so.
Yeah, until everyone was just like, okay, I'm taking this shirt off. I'm just my undershirt.
Yeah.
I am not a big fan of themed birthdays either. Because most of the time it's not a theme that I enjoy. Like, okay, I have an aunt that loves everyone's got a crazy aunt, right? So it's my crazy aunt, and her birthday parties, or she'll convince someone else in our family whose birthday is coming up to do like we've had multiple murder mystery themed birthday parties, and
wait, does someone get killed at the birthday?
It's fun and all. It's just so awkward because there's always people you don't know, and you're supposed to be like in character, and it's weird, and it's a weird social setting, and I hate every single second of it. I look back and I was like, okay, that was kind of fun, but when I'm there, I'm supposed to be talking to this stranger that is an actual stranger in like a Southern accent, trying to figure out if they killed my cousin. You know what I mean? It's just
so it's like that scene from The Office where they're all doing that.
Exactly.
No, and I mean, honestly, I don't know, maybe not. I don't know. The theme birthday party, it sounds fun in theory, but I don't even know which theme I would pick that would make it better than just everybody getting together. I don't. But she did say, Callie and Gabby, I think it was those two, right? They would always dress up, or no, I think it was Callie and her friend or something like that. Yeah. When they were in college, would both dress up. They would be sexy Saruman and sexy Gandalf. So they put on, like, they dye their hair gray and put on beards. And then she said that there was a misconnection that one of the sexy Gandalfs was he could, and it made me think of misconnections because I hadn't thought about that in a really long time. Did you ever go on that?
I've only heard them read on podcasts as jokes, and they are hilarious.
It's
weird. I did go on there. That was one of my things I did for the warm up once. Is I found a bunch of them and I read them. I just remember the one that was like in the produce aisle. It's like, you're the lady that farted in the produce aisle. It was probably made up, but it was hilarious.
Yeah, no, it probably was. I feel like that's always a risk you're running when you're just trusting random anonymous people on Craigslist that are talking about some person they bumped into. There's no telling how real it is.
Yeah, but then Lauren talking about how when she was in college, she would always check misconnections because she was hoping so bad that somebody would be like, "Hey, I saw you on the train today." She's like, "That's me," and no one ever did that.
That's
her.
The thing. I feel
hilarious.
Like even in misconnections, it's going to stay missed unless people are all checking misconnections all the time.
Right. How many people even know that it exists?
Not very many. And it's not, I don't think it's that big of a thing, but yeah.
I don't think so either. But I thought that was maybe my, the funniest bit, in the episode. Now they did mention some stuff that I actually never really thought about until they mentioned it. And I'm like, oh yeah. One of them was how many endings there were in this movie. And I do remember that, where it's like, oh, this is the end. And then you're like, wait, there's a lot of time left. And then you're like, oh, this is the end. And there was like 5 endings where it's like, oh, it's ending here, right? And then there's just another one and another one and another one.
Yeah. And I'm really on the fence about this because I feel like if you stop at the first one, what would the first one be? Like the ring, or because the problem is it's such a weaving story. Like as soon as the fellowship like branches and everybody splits up.
See, that's the thing is like it's from a book, and books are always like this, where like you're following different stories at the same time. And like this chapter's back to the story with Frodo and stuff. And they did a great job in this movie series doing that, like a book. And but that makes it more difficult in a lot of ways.
Because if you end just like Frodo throws the ring into the volcano, the end. Everybody would have lost their freaking minds because you don't find out what happens to Aragorn, or you don't find out what happens to the other hobbits. Where
are the elves?
I feel like they did what the best they could, because I was telling you the other day, there's another ending. That's not the actual ending in the book. The hobbits go back to the Shire, and it's honestly, it's kind of awesome. But it's unnecessary for the movie. And this would have been the one where people were really mad that there was too many endings.
I've actually never read all 3 books. I read the first one. I think I read part of the second one, and I never read the third one.
I really enjoyed the books,
so
as well.
I missed that extra ending, and you were telling me about it, and it kind of blew my mind. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome. It does sound awesome. And
it's pretty cool for sure. Like it's a pretty cool thing.
It's like a battle to get the Shire back.
It's a battle to get the Shire, because I think it's Wormtongue, if I remember correctly. It's been a long time since I read the books. But I think that Wormtongue, after he like betrays Saruman, he goes to the Shire. And so he has like a bunch of orcs and everything, and they take over the Shire. But then Merry and Pippin and Sam come back, and Merry and Pippin are giant now because they drank the Ent water. They all have, Merry and Pippin both have armor because they were like
they were in the battle.
They were fighting the whole time. Mm-hmm. So they come back gigantic and wearing armor, and it's this whole thing of getting the Shire back. And it's pretty awesome. And so, but I felt like they did what they could with having like 5 different stories going at one time. You have to kind of wrap them. And I feel like if they would have left some of them out, people would have been upset there too. It's just one of those things that, and it could just be because I was leaning into this movie is going to be at least 3 hours long. I'm just going to chill. I wasn't in a rush.
Yeah. And one of the other things they mentioned that I'd never really thought about, and they definitely took it, to heart for sure, is how toxic the relationship was between Sam and Frodo. Like I never really saw it that way, and they definitely saw it that way. And once they talked about it, it kind of made sense. But
it's taking the ring out of it. They're looking at that relationship face value with no magic. And like, I get that. I do get that. But that was the whole thing about the ring. The magic of it was the problem. And it was also the reason why, because they talked about him like liking Smeagol. Why did you like him? And it's like, because that's him. Like that he is twisted.
And it's literally the only other person that can relate to him as well, of what's happening to him.
So there was, but once again, that's based on the magic of the ring, so I get why that didn't like connect there, but that's what the story was about, is about like the magic side of that ring affected him greatly.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, all in all, it was a great show. It was hilarious.
Super
it was
funny.
So fun. And like I said, they dig into so many other parts of, talk about the animated series. They talk about, like, I didn't remember there was an animated series. They talk about the books, of course. They talk about so many different things, specifically in Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, of course, as well.
No, I feel like the Tyler Perry might be the funniest one yet, because it's not like at all even attempting to be serious. It's all just goofy. So it'll be probably really funny. So if you're interested in people who do not like certain fandoms, or and previously it was kind of like nerd fandoms, listening to them and talking to people who are really going to nerd out about it, this is a great show. It's really funny. And if you like one of these fandoms like we do, you're going to enjoy it from kind of both angles.
For sure. So that brings us to this week's recommendation. And I will give the credit where the credit's due. Our coworker, John, told me about this show, and I'm like, this sounds fake. There's no way this is real. And I looked it up, and sure enough, this show is real, and it's a Wondery show. And it is, I listened to the whole series in less than 24 hours. Like, it's just, I kind of do that anyway. Like, if something really grabs me, I couldn't stop listening to it. It's called The Apology Line. And here's the synopsis on Spotify. If you could call a number and say you're sorry and no one would know, what would you apologize for? For 15 years, you could call a number in Manhattan and do just that. This is the story of the line and the man at the other end who became consumed by his own creation. He was known as Mr. Apology. As thousands of callers flooded the line, confessing to everything from shoplifting to infidelity, drug dealing to murder, Mr. Apology realized that he couldn't just listen. He had to do something, even if it meant risking everything. From Wondery, the makers of Dr. Death and The Shrink Next Door, comes a story about empathy, deception, and obsession. Marissa Bridge, who knew Mr. Apology better than anyone, hosts this 6-episode series. And it's actually his wife. Like, she lived through the tape. Like, literally, it was like in the 80s is when it started. So this was a tape recorder hooked up to an answering machine. So you heard the messages being left like in your house. So she said it was all the time. Like, whether we're sleeping, they would hear people leaving messages about, I murdered somebody. It's insane. It's an insane story. At first I was like, there's no way it could be true. And it is. And it's very interesting. And I hope you guys like it, because I'm not a big true crime person, but this goes deeper than true crime. That's the thing that I like about it. It's not like a true crime. Mm-hmm. It's more of like a compelling story. So it's called The Apology Line, and we're going to do episode 1 and 2.
Well, sounds good. And remember,
there's always more to discover. Thank you for listening to the Podcast Discovery Show. We would love for you to get in touch. We have a Facebook group called the Podcast Discovery Club, and our Twitter is @thepdsofficial. We also record the show live every Friday night at 8 o'clock on Twitch. We would love for you to be part of the show while we're recording it.
If you want to support the show, we have a number of ways you can do that. From our Patreon to our affiliate links, they're always linked in the show notes. In the end, you support the show just by listening, and it means the world to us. So thank you so much for being a part of our journey.
This was a podcast from the Podfix Network. You can check out more shows like it at podfixnetwork.com.